Welcome to Life's Rich Tapestry, a podcast exploring the narrative of people's layered lives. Listen in on courageous conversations spoken from the heart. Gain insight into another's life as we tackle compelling topics which will expand your mind, help you gain perspective, and might even inspire you to do things differently. My name is Evelyn, and I look forward to your company. And welcome to another episode of Life's Rich Tapestry. My next guest, Nic Newling, is an outspoken advocate for mental health, suicide prevention, and sharing personal stories. Having lived through the experience of suffering with a mood disorder throughout high school and losing his brother to suicide, he has since dedicated himself to changing the way mental illness is addressed in schools, workplaces, and communities. Nic has reached millions of people through television, live talks, radio, print, online, documentaries, and eHealth programs. He strives to make a continuing positive impact, utilizing sharing and listening to encourage helpful, unscripted conversations around mental health, suicide prevention, and getting the most out of life. I would like to welcome Nic to the show. I'm so grateful to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be here speaking with you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. You know what? I love always the start of a story. Let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Sydney in the Northern Beaches, and my parents now live in the Blue Mountains. So I feel kind of quite at home up here actually. But we grew up in Sydney, and I spent most of my life in Sydney, and more recently I lived in America for a little while, and then back to Sydney again. But we get up and back between the mountains and Sydney pretty regularly, so a little bit all over the place.
Tell me a little bit about your little family right now. So you've got a little boy, is that correct?
We do. We have a expanded family. We have a little boy named Finn. He's just turned 2, and I have a lovely wife named Jamie. Mm-hmm. And we live in Sydney as well, and my 2 parents live up here in the mountains, and most Jamie's family is over in America. So now that we're able to travel again, we get around a little bit more, but our immediate family is, just the 3 of us.
Now we're going to talk about mental health, and I know that when you were younger, you weren't able to cope. Share that story with us right now.
Yeah, definitely. It was when I started high school was really when it became a problem. I had a really great, happy childhood before that, but then getting into high school, things started to get really rough. And I think a lot of it was applying a lot of pressure to myself academically and getting quite stressed out. And I don't think that was the cause, but at least was the catalyst for getting into this long period of time where I had depression and anxiety, and it was really, really tough to deal with.
Wow. And so what did your family do when they found out you weren't coping?
Well, I was really fortunate because I think a lot of people have parents who don't really understand it and might take years or decades or never to actually address it and try to get some proper support. So I was really fortunate that my parents got onto it as quickly as possible and started getting me the support I needed. And even that ended up taking several years to really find the right sort of help. So I think if people don't have that support, it's 10 times harder.
And how old were you?
I would have been around sort of 12, 13 when that was beginning to happen. And it was hard because at school I was really trying to keep it to myself. At home I could be more open and free and talk about it. But at school, I don't think anyone was directly nasty about it or anything like that, but I had a fear that they would be. So there was a real tendency to keep it all in and put on a bit of a brave face and not go through that process publicly in any way.
What did you find most helpful at the beginning?
Yeah, I think it did take a while to find anything that was much helpful at all. I think my expectation going into it was, as in most areas of health, if you do need the support of someone
Yeah.
who's an expert in that area, you go see them, you get a referral or whatever, you get some sort of test and some kind of treatment, and then, you're on your merry way. And I thought that would happen with this as well. I go to the GP or I see the school counselor or psychologist, and it just didn't seem to start getting better at all for a while. So it was a quite a long process to find the right kind of help. Try as we might, we hadn't given up or anything like that. But I think the things that helped while I was on that journey was having a freedom to speak about it at home,
Yeah.
having the trust between me and my family, and just having real understanding without that fear of judgment. I think if I wasn't able to open up at home, I really wouldn't have stuck with the treatment or even have tried to get much better, because it would have felt like it was just too
Yeah.
impossible to take on.
Now, what with the help, was it medication or did you have to actually go to a hospital or what did you have to do?
It was a real mix of things. And I think this is why it can be quite hard for people who struggle with mental health, because there's not just a one size fits all. It's not like many other areas of health where, if a doctor gives you, I don't know, something for a sore throat or whatever, it's probably going to work for most people. And if
Yeah,
it doesn't,
yeah.
there's one other thing you can do. And if that doesn't work, then the other one will, kind of thing. Where with mental health, it's often a lot more complex than that. And so there are certain treatments that seem to work really well for a lot of people, but it can be a real challenge to find the right sort of fit. So for me, talking therapy was helpful later on, but in the early days, I wasn't really stable enough to make the most of that, and I wasn't really able to concentrate very well because of the mental illness. So it was really hard to get out of the talking therapy too. So medication ended up being really helpful for me in the long run. But I think the big picture that might apply to more people is, I think it's a matter of finding what works for you. It's finding the right support, the right treatment, whatever you want to call it, for the individual and for what they're going through. And for some people, that may be medication. For other people, it might not be. I had art therapy at times. I had music
Yeah.
therapy. All different kinds of things can contribute in different ways. And I think a lot of it is simply finding what clicks.
Yeah. I did read somewhere that it was hard. I can't remember where exactly, but I think maybe even heard it on a documentary that it was hard for you to remember or to even read books. And do you think it was because of the medication or?
Yeah, I think that was more to do with the mental illness itself.
Okay.
And that was a really tricky one for me, because so much of what the mental illness seemed to affect in my life were things that were really important to me.
Yeah.
It's sort of like when you meet someone who might have an injury, say, with their leg. And if that happened to someone who doesn't really like getting around much anyway, you might be like, oh, okay, well, obviously that's not very good, but at least, you don't need to be running around. But if it happened to a marathon runner or someone who's a, professional sports person, well, that's really devastating. And I think for me, the mental illness, the things that it seemed to really take away from me were things that mattered the most. So school was really important to me. That was sort of a big, big part of my life, an area that I got a lot of joy from, and that really provided a huge amount of my self-esteem and my identity. And so the mental illness affecting that was really rough. And to your question about what they call the cognitive impairment, it was really just like a brain fog. It's just
Wow.
not being able to think as the way I once could, not being able to really remember, feeling like being in a bit of a hazy fog. And yeah, I would read maybe a book every day or two when I was, a bit younger, and then really, really shortly into this part of my life, I would just read the same sentence over and over again, and it just would not get stuck in my head. And I'd read a paragraph, and by the end of it, I couldn't remember what I just read, moments earlier. And so you imagine I'm faced with that, not even knowing why it's happening and
yeah.
going, this is going to really jeopardize my future. It was just sort of a lot to get stressed about.
At the same time, your brother was going through his mental health journey as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, we both were struggling at the same time in similar ways with depression and anxiety. And we both were getting a lot of support for it. But I think what made it different between us was that I felt I could speak about it a bit more.
Okay.
And I think my brother Christopher probably didn't feel he, even though he was given the opportunity to, he was being listened to and taken seriously. I think there was still more of a hesitation for him to speak about it. And I suspect that probably comes from a bit of a fear of not being perceived as a tough, strong, brave
Yes.
person,
Yeah.
which, I mean, I certainly don't think having a mental illness makes you weak or anything like that. But I think a lot of people, and I suppose, we probably did as well at the time, when you feel fragile and vulnerable, I think it can pretty easily be mistaken as weakness. So I think for him, being the sports star and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff, I think he felt like he probably had more to lose by expressing it.
So when he did commit suicide, I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for you as well, because you were thinking those thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, this was
yeah.
a few years into our mental health journeys. So I was in year 10 and he was in year 11 when he died. And I'd already been struggling with thoughts of suicide leading up to that myself, just completely separately of that and completely unaware that he was going through it in the way he was as well. So it came as a massive shock to me, and I think most of our school community and our local community as well, because we didn't know what someone who was having suicidal thoughts looked and acted like. And people would say he's such a confident, happy, charming guy, so it couldn't possibly be true. It has to be a rumor.
Yeah. It's funny with mental illness. It's like that because you don't know that someone is not doing well. With a physical illness, you can tell right away, but with a mental health illness, you can't. After Christopher died, then you went on this journey of getting better.
Yeah, I went to Rivendell before that. I went to two different hospitals. So the first one was maybe a year after I started getting unwell in the first place in early high school, and that was a hospital for young people, which is half school, half hospital combined, and I really, really liked that. That was a really great environment for me to be in because there wasn't that stigma and that judgment and that fear and that need to keep up appearances and perform and compete and achieve. It was a really great environment for me to be in. But in the other hospital I was in after Christopher died, perhaps a few months after he died, I was there because I was just really not doing well, even just in general, but particularly with dealing with the grief of losing him, because he and I were very close. And obviously you can imagine my parents were so worried about me. So after he died, I wouldn't say there was a cause and effect in as much as, okay, that's happened and it's a wake-up call and now I have to sort of change things, because I already felt like I was doing as much as I possibly could to get better, and it sort of seemed like it was out of my control. It was sort of in the hands of other people, and just sort of hoping that I could find some brilliant genius doctor anyone, someone of some expertise who could just sort of, wave a magic wand and it would all be okay. And it seemed like that just wasn't going to happen. But I think what did change after Christopher died is that it really reaffirmed the fact that I was no longer able to take my own life either, because I think that was the one thing that was really holding me back from going too far down that path, was this idea of just thinking what would happen to my family and how that would just impact them so much. And I spent a lot of my days thinking about exactly that. It was an escape for me to kind of just sit there in class and just imagine not existing anymore. And the thing that would stop me was just thinking, well, my parents will have to move house when I die because, they're going to think of me being in there, and we're going to not celebrate family gatherings anymore and not have dinner at the dinner table, all these sorts of things I'd think about. And then when Christopher died, those things did all happen, and so it just reaffirmed that that's no longer an option. So it wasn't something which was sort of inspired me to make a huge change. It was just something that removed that entirely as an option. So it was more in my mind, it's like, well, I guess I'm just going to live out the rest of my natural years in this state of being awfully depressed and anxious, and that's just how it's going to be now.
Wow.
So I didn't have a great deal of hope at all. Really none.
Oh gosh, but then there was a doctor who observed something.
Yeah,
and that's
right.
What.
It was the first thing that went right in a long time was end of year 10, I think, or early year 11 maybe. And this doctor I'd been seeing for quite a while before that, after seeing maybe, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 different, I can't count how many it was. So this particular doctor had looked at my record and said, look, you've had a lot of different opinions from different doctors, and it seems like nothing's really quite clicked. Mm-hmm. And he was just very honest. He said, I don't exactly know what, how long this might take or what the outcome might be, but we're just going to keep working at it, and I'm not going to refer you around. We're just going to this will be the journey that we embark on. And it had come up earlier on as a bit of a possibility of, maybe this depression could actually be a bipolar depression, which is when you have the very low and difficult to control lows of mood. But with bipolar, you also have the complete opposite, those very big highs of mood. And they can be really enjoyable, or they can be really agitating. Kind of just depends on the person. But for me and many other people with bipolar, there's a bias there, because we go to doctors and we feel awful. We don't go in there when we say, I'm having the absolute time of my life.
Yeah,
can you bring me back down to earth? You say, this feels amazing. Don't stop it. And so when you look at it through the paradigm of it being a unipolar depression, well, when I'm having those highs, it looked like, oh, okay, well, the antidepressants are working. I'm back to my old self again. I'm getting back on stage and doing the theater and all this stuff that I really enjoy. But actually that mania was a symptom of a different condition. And so what this doctor had observed when I was in the hospital was exactly that. It was one of those manic highs, which I would never raise in a clinical setting in his office.
Okay.
But then when he witnessed me, I think I was drawing or painting or something, and he asked how long I'd been doing it for, and I just said, 3 days with no sleep, just the usual kind of thing. And I think that seemed to reaffirm or affirm what had been a bit of a theory a long time ago. And so he put me on the right treatment for that condition, and I improved a lot in a pretty short period of time, And I don't want to make it out that medication is the be all and end all. It was really beneficial to me personally in a lot of ways. It wasn't the entire picture. I think what ended up being really helpful alongside the medication was really good talking therapy and just structuring my life in a way which allowed me to do things that I really enjoy and I really care about, and getting to spend more time working on those things. And also just sort of trying to find some ways to, make sense of the past a bit and realize that, I missed out on a lot in school, but it doesn't have to totally dictate how the rest of my life looks. So it was a bit of a journey.
And so how did the Black Dog Institute, how did that evolve?
It's a bit of an interesting story, because one of the things that I talk to Year 12 students about is how our careers can often meander and have these twists and turns, and that you might have a bit of an idea in your mind of where your whole career is going to end up in 20, 30 years and then be pleasantly surprised that it actually completely changed. And that was the case for me. I think part of it was just a bit of random chaos and sort of just good fortune. And what had happened was I was getting a lot better as a result of getting help from the Black Dog Institute. And they're a mental health research institute. And they do lots of different stuff. But at that time, they were particularly focused on mood disorders. And so I had said to my doctor, when I started getting well, I said, I really have this interest in public speaking and being in front of an audience and that sort of stuff. And I think now that I'm getting a lot better, I'd like to be able to, pay it forward in some sense and try to help some other people by speaking a little bit about what I went through. And so he put me in touch with some people within the Black Dog Institute who work in the sort of community side of things, and just found a few opportunities to participate in some education opportunities and whatnot. And it really took on a bit of a life of its own from there. And it just felt like it would be a little bit of a thing on the side. But I actually spoke at a book launch at Black Dog Institute, and someone from an entirely different team there saw me speak at this media event and said, "Oh, we're launching this new online program for young people about having them share their stories online in a sort of safe and helpful environment. We'd love to have you be a part of that." And I just thought they meant as a volunteer. I was like, I'll help out with that. And then, before too long, it became a part-time job and then a full-time job. And 6 years later, I was pretty deeply embedded in what they were doing there. So,
and what is that online?
That program,
whatever. Yeah, what's that program
so
called?
That particular program is called Bite Back.
Okay.
And that was built around positive psychology as a concept. So it's basically getting these different modules that they built based upon research, which kind of shows, well, what can people do who might not necessarily be struggling with a disorder of some sort? They may not be, but people who are sort of somewhere in the middle a bit, they're not doing absolutely awful, but they're not really, really thriving.
Yeah.
And how can we get these people who are sort of just maybe, life's okay, but not great?
Yeah.
How do we help them really get the most out of life? And so that's what Bite Back aimed to do with these online modules, helping people utilize things like gratitude and mindfulness and different things like that to really sort of, kick things up a notch.
And with Bite Back, is it embedded sort of in schools? They know about it and they let their students know, or how does that, or is it up to students to find this themselves, or how does it work?
Well, when we created it, our intention was to make it more like a game like any other. It's a thing that people would just come across and utilize and get some benefit from. And so I left Black Dog Institute about 6 years ago because I really wanted to focus more on the pointy end suicide prevention side of things, and also getting out into the community, speaking to people face to face. And so I haven't kept up to date with Bite Back quite as much, but when I last looked at it, they were certainly doing more with schools and within schools, which I think makes a lot of sense.
And I did see that you do the mental health roadshows. How does that work? Do schools actually contact you and say, "Hey, Nick, come to our high school. We'd like you to speak"? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, the reason why I'm in the Blue Mountains right now is I've just been in Bathurst the last 2 days, going back down there next week. So Lura is base camp for us.
Oh,
right
good.
So I speak in lots of different schools all over the place, and obviously throughout COVID that's been a bit limited, but I generally spend as much time as I can getting into high schools. And so sometimes it is just local within Sydney. Other times I might go to a different city for a day. But what's really great is when we get to do these roadshows, we go out to these different towns, different communities, and speak in as many schools as there is time for. And what we'll often find ourselves doing is linking up with the local support services there. So in this case, for example, getting involved with the local Headspace in Bathurst, and they invited in a representative from Lifeline. And so I'll speak to students about my personal story of things that they can probably relate to, about all the things that happened in school with me and how we found a way through all that. And then really you look at the practical application of, well, this isn't just a story. It's how does this actually apply to people? What sort of take-home messages can an audience take of saying, well, this is some nugget of information that I can actually use to help myself and help my friends. And so we do that. And then we have a bit of a Q&A section, which is just having the audience ask whatever questions they might have. And the great thing about that is it shows other people in the audience that their friends actually care about this stuff too.
Yeah,
It's not just them who's the only one going through it. And what's really cool is working with people like Headspace and Lifeline is that they get to join in as part of a panel discussion. So we'll go to one of these road shows and young people will be left with a better idea of what mental health is all about, but some really good contacts with people in their community that they can then follow up with to get some support themselves if they need to.
Yeah, I do think dialogue is definitely more out there, but I do think there's been a few more challenges. So I want to talk about that. So what sort of effect has COVID had on mental health? What have you done during this time? Have you done more Zoom sort of presentations?
Yeah, I think it's just been such a globally disruptive thing, which I know we hear all the time. It's the sort of I don't know, they're almost like catchphrases of unprecedented times and all this sort of stuff. I've heard it a million times, but I think it has disrupted things in ways that are sometimes awful, sometimes probably beneficial, and sometimes maybe neutral but different. So you think about things like, well, okay, it's been pretty bad that everyone's had to knock it out of the house and not be able to, do what they want to do. But then you say, well, as a consequence, it seems like a lot of people, when the dust is settling, have realized, well, we actually have some work flexibility now, and that's been sort of normalized, and that's a really good thing for us in our lives, and able to work at home 1 or 2 days a week, that sort of thing. So I think it's not just workplaces that have found that. I think what we've seen is that this has been really difficult for students in a lot of ways, and there has been some benefits too. But I think as far as mental health goes, I think a lot of it, there's the obvious things that you'd probably expect in terms of having a lot of difficulty accessing the people who can provide care to them, and whether that's being, in hospitals, or even just having one more barrier in place to seeing a counsellor, that sort of thing, or having less contact with a school counsellor. But I think a lot of the things that when I speak to students and they tell me what has been most disruptive and impactful, I mean, you can imagine the most obvious thing is having to do bloody Zoom classes all the time.
Yes, I can imagine.
But the lingering things seem to be perhaps less obvious. And one of the things they often say is missing out on having their school formal.
Yes.
Or their graduation in person. And I think a lot of people who aren't really connected to schools or young people would be like, well, mate, who cares? It's 3 hours of your life. Get over it. But that's really, really important to people. It's just sort of so much of their school and career culminates in these really big, important events they've been looking forward to forever. And then that just gets wiped off the table and you kind of are left with this feeling of emptiness. And so I think that has been harder than a lot of people will recognize. So there's that. But then I think what have some other more positive things been? Well, there's been a real recognition that mental health care isn't just, or at least shouldn't just be, two people sitting in an office face to face. I think there needs to be a lot better access. And I think what we've found through eHealth initiatives, which Black Dog Institute do quite a lot of, but also through telehealth, that needs to be funded through Medicare ongoing. That shouldn't just be a temporary COVID thing. People should be able to get their phone or their laptop out and connect with a professional who does that for a job and is trained in it. And if they live in the middle of the country and nowhere near a major city or anything, it should be just as easy for them to do that. And I think COVID's highlighted how technology can be used in a better way.
In a good way. Good way. What do you think, though, teenagers nowadays, I think their challenges and pressures are different than from when you were going through your issues, and the same with me, a long time ago. What sort of, because you see this more, and I can just imagine people can really trust you because you have that look and you look really young and you know what I mean? I'm sure they probably tell you everything. So what sort of challenges and pressures do teenagers face now?
Well, I'm glad you used the word different because I think a lot of the time I hear parents say everything's awful in this next generation. They've got all these challenges that are really scary, and not saying society's gone to the dogs kind of thing, but it almost sounds a bit like catastrophizing a bit. But I think you're right; it's different. I don't think it's necessarily better or worse. It's just challenges that we haven't had to face as a society before. So yes, young people have to have this really difficult thing to grapple with of having this non-stop access to information and communication, which you can't just go home and walk away from. But then, previous generations had, conscription to wars and, like polio and family breakdown, just all different kinds of things that I think every decade has awful and fantastic things about it if you're born into that particular decade. I think right now we've got a lot of really good things going for us, for our young people. We've got people who normally would be really socially isolated if they felt like they couldn't get out of the house much, or if they had some sort of physical issue that meant they couldn't get out of the house much, and now they can be almost as socially engaged online as a lot of their peers. That seems to be how a lot of their social interaction works. So I don't want to write off social media and the internet completely, but it does come with a lot of difficulties. And I think the big one, to answer your question, is that a lot of people feel always on display and hyper exposed and hyper connected, and it can be really difficult to get a moment to yourself, and to also really get in touch with an authentic self. I think when we're always on display and showing ourselves in some way or another through social media and sort of curating what we want our experiences to be perceived as, it does cause issues. But then the other side of it is, well, that's the world that they've grown up in. So is it that normal, or is it not?
I know it's it's probably not normal for us because it's just something new. I mean, even with me and you, because even when you were going through your mental health journey, I don't even think Facebook was out, was it? Because
it was nearer the end of the worst of it that social media was really sort of taking off. It's just a total different way of communicating. But I think if you talk to young people, some of them say social media is great and some of them say social media is awful. And it doesn't mean that they are old souls or anything like that. It just means that they realize the complexities of it. And I think few will completely write it off and just say, I'm not going to engage with it whatsoever, because it is so normal and it is such a part of how people communicate with each other. But what I am pleased to see is that young people are aware of its limitations, or its parts of it that might be false, or parts of it that might be harmful. And I see through education in schools learning how to actually cope with that, or gain some control over it, which I don't think you can ever do fully, but I think there's at least a really good effort at it these days.
That's correct. Now this is going back a little bit, but the Australian story, how did that come about?
Yeah, so that was a documentary we did, me and my family, and I'm trying to recall the exact detail of how it all sort of came together, but I think it may have actually been related to my mum's memoir that she wrote. So she wrote a really, really amazing book about our whole experience for our whole family going through this really, really difficult journey. Obviously with losing my brother was, a really awful part of it, but it also talks about everything leading up to it and after it, with the mental illnesses of me and my brother, and also just the journey through grief as a parent while also trying to keep the family together. So Mum wrote this incredible book, and I know it's helped a lot of people out there, and she's very, very raw and honest in the way she approaches it. And so we found this opportunity to speak about what it is that she was doing and what it is that I was doing, but more importantly, not just our work, but really about the experience of the whole thing, to kind of highlight to people that it can be really difficult, and it is really difficult.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that people don't care, and it doesn't mean there's not people out there who are happy to support, and that things genuinely can end up better than we probably think they will.
Yeah.
To put it, that's probably like the lowest barrier. If that sounds the most realistic. Because I was very skeptical of anyone who would say that to me when someone would come into our school, or even just some sort of personal contact would try to give me a bit of hope, and I would just be instantly not interested in that. I would be very, very careful about accepting any sort of light into my life at that time. So I guess I try to be as careful as I can to say that it's not about, things are going to be magically, wonderfully better and all you got to do is believe. It's that, taking a real an earnest attempt at improving with support of other people, genuinely it can lead to much better outcomes than we otherwise would have had.
Yeah. Do you think, though, young people now are more open to help, though? I would think they are, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it seems to be getting better all the time, but it doesn't apply across the board evenly. And I think you'll find that people in certain communities, whether that be in a regional area or a city, that may be a difference, or it may just be particular cohorts within a school. For whatever reason, this particular Year 9 group in this particular school struggles with this, and the year below and above them doesn't. So I think it just can be as small as that. But I think what we often find is that people who are in younger years in high school, or even in primary school, will be a lot more open to speaking about mental health. But when they get a bit older and it starts becoming a bit more real and might apply to them personally, and it's not just sort of a thing you think about, it can make a lot of people tend to grow to ground a bit more and not really want to discuss it quite as openly. So it varies a lot. But what I have been surprised to see, so in the talks that I do, we always take feedback data from the students, so they can fill out these little forms anonymously and talk about what they felt about the presentation. And one of the questions I asked is, how much has this affected stigma? How much has the negative attitudes of mental illness changed as a result of this? And part of that question is asking, is stigma even a problem in your school? And for someone like me who works in this area and we're sort of faced with it every single day, before I started taking these surveys, I would have said, stigma is much less of a problem now because you sort of work in that area. But looking at the survey data, it seems that only about 4 or 5% of people say that stigma is not a problem in their school. So we have 95 or so percent of people say this is an issue.
Wow.
So and as we know, those negative attitudes of mental illness, or even the perception that there are negative attitudes of mental illness, can make us really not want to speak up about it, about our own experiences, which is what we really need to be doing when it does get tricky. Yeah.
When did you start champions.org? Because that was started a few years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Champions. So I decided at a certain point I didn't want my presentations to only be about me and just me as a person. I thought, well, maybe we could sort of create a bit of an idea. It's bigger than me, which can really be a bit of a vehicle to carry a message that can apply to more people. And so I was actually just doing a talk in a very small rural town and speaking about my experience and whatnot. And a guy in the audience came up to me afterwards, and this is a town of maybe 500 or so people, and he came up to me and he said, look, you won't believe this, but I'm actually a branding expert from London, and I'm just I'm just in this small town. He said, I came to Australia, I got a van, and I started driving around and finding people who need my branding services. So he's sort of like giving away these very skillful things to people who really need it. And so we kind of got together and came up with this idea, and the tagline is that we champion sharing to help improve mental health.
I love
so
it.
it's sort of like saying anyone can really be a champion of that cause. And so that's sort of the platform that we stand upon. And the idea is, well into the future someday we'll quite likely have other people who are sharing stories in the same way that I am. And also alongside that, finding different ways to tell stories through whether it be videos or whatever else. Because I want it to be something that can really resonate with lots of people and not just be about me and my one sort of life,
I mean, there is something about sharing stories and the connection that you feel with people when they get really raw and into it. So I love that idea. And I love how things happen to you.
It's
random town,
random, Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
There you go.
So now how did you, because you were saying that you've spoken in the States as well. How did that happen?
Yeah, so I was doing my very first talk overseas at a suicide prevention conference in Montreal. And it just came to me as an opportunity in my email when I was working at Black Dog Institute. And it said, "Boop, hey, if you want to apply for this thing, just put an application in and give it a go." And most people who work at Black Dog Institute are academics, but it sort of went out to everybody. But I'm like, I'll just sort of give it a go and see what they say. And so I put an application because I thought, it's really important for people who work in this area, on the academic side of things, to really understand a lived experience perspective as well. So you don't get too sort of stuck in your bubble. And so they accepted it, and I went over there and spoke to a conference there, which was really, really great. And then I also ended up meeting the woman that I married a few years later.
Oh my goodness. There you go.
Yeah.
I love how your life is.
Yeah. Kind of win-win on that one. Yeah. So that worked out obviously really, really well. So we met. I'm terrible at geography. So I was like, okay, I'm going to Montreal. I know it's somewhere in Canada. I think it's down the bottom roughly. So I looked up on a map and I'm like, it's actually right near New York. So I thought I'd just go visit there afterwards. And in that time I met Jamie, who I'm now married to and have a little boy with. Yeah.
And how did you meet her?
It was just at a cafe in New York, just
you go.
sort of randomly through a friend. She said, it wasn't like a romantic setup, but it was like, you two are like-minded people. Maybe you just want to hang out for lunch or something. And it just really clicked. And then I had to leave the next day to come back to Australia. But then, we really connected a lot through text and FaceTime and that sort of stuff. And then I visited a couple more times over the next year, and then decided to leave my job at Black Dog Institute and move over there. So we lived there for about a year, and then we moved back to Australia, which is where we are now. And now we have our little boy. And we got to visit America for the first time in a long time a couple months ago, because Finn's a little COVID baby. So he's finally got to meet his family for the first time after forever,
Oh, I love it. I love how your life, it unfolds, like things happen for you. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, it's not always part of the plan.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's what I tell young people, is that a lot of what works is adapting to different circumstances rather than setting a goal and ignoring everything else with this sort of like laser-like focus, because I think you miss out on a lot if you do that.
Definitely. Being open to change, just in case. But I love that.
Sure.
Now, what do you love the most about your job?
Oh, wow. I love a lot about my job, to be honest. I really love the discussion part of it. I love sitting there or standing there on stage and seeing, a couple hundred young people who are actually really listening and engaged in this topic, and just hearing them ask their questions, really honest, brave questions, and and being able to respond to it, and just getting them used to the idea of discussing these things openly as a cohort, because we didn't really have that a lot when I was their age, and I felt that's what would have been the most helpful. And so just seeing that happen and having teachers afterwards say, oh, they actually were really listening, which they don't often do. It's sort of like, I'm really glad of all the times they chose to listen, and that that was a time. So I enjoy the actual experience of doing it. But also for me personally, I think it actually really is good for my mental health to be speaking about these things as well. I really personally get a lot out of it. And meeting new people, getting to travel a bit as well. It's cool. But what's also great is that it's not your average 9 to 5 office job. So one of the best parts about it is that I actually get to spend a lot of time with my wife and son and my parents. You know, and I think that's really quite unique. Not everyone gets to do that. So I'm really fortunate about that.
Do they travel with you?
Sometimes, For the most part, I've been... Well, I guess asking that question in a year, because the COVID lockdowns have only somewhat recently-ish finished. So the traveling I've been doing so far has been mostly within New South Wales, and I might just go away for a night or maybe 2. So in that case, they haven't come with me. But as time goes on and we start doing more of it, then the idea is that Jamie and Finn will come along and travel a little bit as well, and hopefully Finn will learn to sleep a little bit better at that point, so I'm a little bit more fresh and ready to go in the morning.
Love it. So if anyone's listening now and they want to hire you, how does that work? I will put all the show notes and how to contact. I mean, is it through your website?
Yeah, just simply thechampions.org. There's a little contact form there that goes straight to my email, and we can just pick up the phone and chat after they get in touch and make it all happen. So it's a really great thing to be doing, and of course I always love working with schools, and I sometimes get to speak in workplaces too, which is great, but I really love speaking at a school and then also speak to their parents afterwards.
Yes.
And I seem to be doing more of that lately, and that's a great thing, because I think a lot of what's really needed is for these conversations to happen at home. And I think parents are almost all, I should say parents, carers, anyone that you call family, really want to help young people.
Yeah, they
but
do.
They don't often know how. And that's totally understandable. And sometimes young people mistake that inability or perceived inability of parents and carers to help as a lack of interest or an inability to help. But it's really, I say to them, you got to give your family a chance, set them up to succeed in supporting you. Don't write them off immediately. But I think a lot of what does make that flow is having parents get a bit of a better idea of it outside of their own family and use that as a bit of a way to have a conversation with their kids.
Because you've gone through this experience, you're relatable as well. So I think kids automatically, I don't want to call them kids, but I guess that age group, they are kids or young. Yeah. Do you call them young adults or preteens? Or I don't even know.
I think we're all very confused.
Yeah, we are.
We'll have to ask them. What do you call yourself, kids? I don't know, kids, teenagers, students.
But I mean, because you went through the same thing that they went through. I mean, when you were quite young, when you first went through it. So I think they could easily relate to you.
And they often do. And I think a lot of it is, it's not just about me. I think a lot of it is simply that it's about storytelling. Yeah. Because that's just such a core part of our experience as human beings, is being able to communicate our experiences. And that's, every part of, entertainment, movies, TV, even sport. That's like stories as well. That seems to make people get engaged with it. So it's just such an innate part of what we're all about. So I think when we have mental health described to us in terms of stats and figures and stuff like that, I think that certainly has its place in trying to understand the health science perspective. But I think when you've got someone talking about a story, or it's like any documentary, you kind of go, well, that's just a real thing, and I don't need to know anything to just jump in and listen, So I think that sort of the fact that it is more storytelling based makes it more relatable, I think.
Yeah. So what is the future look like for you?
Oh, wow.
That's
You'll have to have me back in 5 years and see if I had any guess that's even close, given the random nature of everything so far.
Yeah.
I don't want to predict it too much, but I would say I'd definitely still be doing this kind of work. I think it's just sort of a part of me now, and I really get a lot out of it. So I think I'd love to still be doing what I'm doing and probably just expanding it in different directions, I would say. And that would probably be involving other people and, producing, different ways of telling stories and whatnot. And I think as far as, the other side of my life, I'd love to just, simply be spending a lot of time with my wife and kid as well, and and obviously my parents and all the fun stuff that goes with that, and and traveling, and it kind of just sounds like what I'm doing now, but just more of it, I guess. I don't know. We'll have to just wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure having you on today's show, and I look forward to hearing what's happening in a few years' time. I will have you come back.
Yeah, thank you so much.
But thank you so much. Thank you so much for your company. Please tune in next week to Life's Rich Tapestry, where you will hear another courageous conversation spoken from the heart.